Welcome to Business Innovators Radio, featuring industry influencers and trendsetters sharing proven strategies to help you build a better life right now.
This is guest host Donna Gunter. Today we have with us David Winters, international patent attorney, technologist, and author. David is a retired attorney at law with a broad international, professional, and academic background. He has been admitted before the U.S. Patent Bar, the Tennessee Bar, and the United States Supreme Court. He specialized in patent, trademark, and copyright applications, plus intellectual property management. He was previously a ship's officer, farmer, aviator, Cold War codemaster, international consultant in Europe and Asia, and a 1976 graduate of the United States Naval Academy. He's also the author of numerous articles and books, and one book in particular that we're here to talk about today, The Pirate's Guide to Patents, Trademarks, and Copyrights. Welcome to the show, Dave.
Thank you very much. I'm pleased to be here.
Well, Dave, what was going on in your law practice that made you decide to write your book on patents?
Well, forgive me, I had set up my practice specifically to serve an underserved populace that could not afford expensive intellectual property attorneys, of whom I was one. So, in this niche, I found that people were in businesses where they couldn't afford their own intellectual property departments, but their businesses actually depended on their intellectual property. So I was filling that need for them. And as I developed my practice and gained experience, I realized that their perspective was different from those I was taught. It was different from those in the books. It was different from anything that anybody was really addressing, which was the down and dirty, how does it really work in the business world with intellectual property? Not law theory, not statutes, not case, just how does it work? Tell me how it works. Don't give me a bunch of jargon. Teach me how to take care of this very important asset, because my whole business is based on it. My patents, my copyrights, my trademarks. There was nothing like that. I was teaching my clients how to do this. I was giving them that kind of information, but there were so many more people who needed it than I could possibly serve, who didn't even know that they needed it. It's one thing not to know. It's worse not to know that you don't know, and that was the situation most people were in. My book was written to fill that need.
So other than in educating people who could not afford an intellectual property attorney, did you hope to accomplish anything else by writing the book?
Well, I know this sounds a little, let's say, unusual for a lawyer, but my target was to have people, was to make my clients successful. I was there to provide something they needed and not to feather my nest alone. So, by writing the book, I was getting that ball rolling, and it was something that I could give to people to prime the pump a little bit, because if they didn't know what they didn't know, then they really didn't understand they needed to talk to me. But if they got a hold of this book, they sat down, they found that it was entertaining, it was easy to understand, it told them things they never imagined, and it told them about things they needed to know that they didn't even know existed, and it told them how to address their own businesses in such a way as to make them more successful. Then they'd be ready to come to me and get my help to make that happen. So it was better than posting advertisements and putting my name in the phone book, because if you don't know you need an intellectual property attorney or a patent attorney or a trademark attorney, then you don't go looking for them in the phone book anyway. My books were what they needed to know. Yeah.
Well, I noticed I noticed that you took what I would consider a pretty dry area of law, patents, trademarks, and copyrights. And I know this because I've worked with other IP and patent attorneys on their books, and they are, just pretty black and white, pretty humdrum. But you chose a really unique route to write about this, adopting the vernacular, and I guess it's to say, of a pirate, as I read through your book last night. And just curious of how you ended upon that, the pirate way, in terms of educating your populace about patents, trademarks, and copyrights. I mean, it's a very humorous way, but how did you choose that particular bit of humor as your way of education?
Well, if you hear people laughing, listen closely, because somebody just told the truth. The truth is funny when you just face it. So it comes across as humorous, and I intend for it to be a little bit, but primarily it comes from telling the truth about what's going on. Now, before I retired from the Navy, I was codemaster during the Cold War in Europe. And by learning how people serve their own self-interests, I was able to initiate and integrate a worldwide revolution in communications security that, now this sounds absurd, so I'm just going to tell you the truth. That's why it sounds absurd. I shortened the Cold War, saved numerous lives and millions of dollars, and fostered new industries, and nobody ever knew, because I snuck it in a Trojan horse that made it look like I was just saving money. It's easy to do something, way easier if you don't care who gets the credit. So for 30 years, nobody even knew about it. I finally presented this for the International Symposium on Cryptologic History. Well, I had learned in my field by then how to maneuver like a pirate. So when I retired, I, frankly, became a techno-pirate. Except I wasn't stealing anything. I was smuggling things. What I was smuggling was telecommunications service. In Europe, back in those days, they had very poor service. It cost way too much, and they couldn't meet demand. So I brought them very good service at an extremely low price, and I gave them all they could get. All they could want. So I had become a techno-pirate. And from this, I learned, as a pirate, here's what a pirate wants. Here's what a pirate wants to avoid. And therefore, here's the way to avoid pirates. Well, with intellectual property, oh, by the way, I want to throw this in. What I was doing was, in fact, legal according to international law. Now, the locals didn't care much for it, but they couldn't go after me in the courts because I was right. So it ended up a cat and mouse game technology.
Right.
Anyway, I did that for years. And that's why I didn't go to jail, because I was actually legal. It's just didn't know a lot. So I took this view, and I said, okay, if I have intellectual property, how do I avoid having it stolen? And then I wrote an article on this called Confessions of a Techno-Pirate for the National Bar Journal, and it just skyrocketed with interest, and it was named the Article of the Year. And then I'd see my ideas, which had never been addressed like this before, appearing in academic works, research. Now they didn't credit me, but it caused a revolution in how people thought, and was a very good predictor of what was going to happen in the music industry, intellectual property, there in Nashville, which may be very unpopular at the time, but then later,
I can imagine, when
people could go back and read what I had, well, there was a tremendous amount of respect generated. So I think I kind of went off the wall there explaining it, but that's how I decided to do it. It was because, in fact, I was a pirate, and I learned what pirates want, and I learned how to fend them off and how to lick them by making them play fair. That was the real key to it. And it works, by the way, with real pirates. I'm using the word pirate now in a humorous way. But in fact, my same philosophy works with real pirates at sea. And we had some exchange with some of the higher level military commanders who were my classmates, of course, on the same subjects, because the philosophy applies all the way across the board, not just technology.
Right, right. Well, it sounds like then your book had its genesis in this article for the Nashville Bar Journal. How did that go from just that one article, which I assume maybe was only 1,000, maybe 1,500 words, to a full-fledged book? Did you have to use a ghostwriter? Did you have other material you developed?
Well,
how did the rest of it come about?
After I wrote that article, I found myself very soon on the editorial board of the Bar Journal, and quite a demand for my writing style, because lawyers like it too. Lawyers like, especially if you're not an intellectual property attorney, it's a very specialized field. Other attorneys want to get the hot dope without all the jargon and the references. They just want to, how's it going to work? What do I do? How do I do it? Or who do I send him to? Or what do I advise him? And so I continued writing stories, or pieces. I wrote pieces about downloading. I wrote pieces about 3D printing. All sorts of things that involved the evolving nature of intellectual property and the changing rules, and frankly, the dismissal of the previous gatekeepers who could keep everybody else out. So people would have to learn what the new technologies and rules are in this new world of their intellectual property. I wrote articles about China and how to avoid having your stuff ripped off by the Chinese, and how to manufacture in China without them actually figuring out what you're manufacturing, things like that. So after a while, I had quite a collection of articles. I realized they had the better part of a book, essentially, already prepared. So I just thought about, well, what did I left out? And there's some basic things that I could toss in, and boom, there was an entire volume of useful information.
Now, did you end up doing all the editing and cover design yourself, or did you outsource that part of your book?
I did the cover design myself. I did the editing myself. And that was an education unto itself. So this was my third book. Well, my first one was written decades ago when we didn't have word processors. We had genuine galley proofs before publishing. I cut and pasted the entire thing with scissors and cellophane tape.
I remember those days.
in script handwriting, and my handwriting is horrendous. Excuse me. So I'd have the floor of my living room covered with pages in order, and I'd be cutting and pasting and moving stuff around. And then I hired a sailor from my own ship to type it up in his free time. But I had an editor because that book was bought before I wrote it. I didn't have an agent. I didn't know I had to have an agent, so I never got one. And this was the first book I ever wrote, and I didn't know you can't sell your first book, but I did because it filled a need. So I had an editor, and it worked out pretty well. However, The Pirate's Guide, I didn't hire an editor. And I think I must have gone through 15 or 16 editing phases. I wrote the book, I put it out there, and then I'd read it and go, my gosh, I can't believe I got that screwed up. I spelled this wrong. I got this intro. And I'd go through and get all I could find, and I'd stop publication and update the book. And I just did this over and over and over and over. And I now have on my desk a copy that has one error in it. And I'm not going to fix it. I've got it marked. It's on my desk. It says, okay, it is 99.999% perfected. And in theory, I'll never get it perfect anyway. So that's where it stops. The lesson in this was, I probably would have done well to get an editor. But in this case, one of my purposes was to have an example for authors who might be my clients to see how they could enter this new world of self-publishing without spending a penny. So I made sure that I spent nothing on anybody or anything to produce this book, and then I put all the necessary information on the front that anybody who had half a brain cell could go through it and see exactly what I had done, where I had gone to do it, who had done the publishing, everything for free. Now, this is knowing that they can pay to get an editor, they can pay to get cover design, and I worked hours on it, many hours, I don't know, maybe hundreds of hours on my cover design and getting it perfected. It was a lot of work, probably would have cost much less to get professional, but I like my cover design, and I like the contents on the back, the back cover. I like all of it. I'm very, very satisfied with it because I did it myself, and I think it looks professional. However, as I said, I did it that way because I wanted it made available as a real life lesson to people who want to write on their own and don't want to become a source of income to other people to do for their writing work. Not that I would advise that everything be done that way, but I proved it can be done, and I do finally have a good product.
So it sounds like you went through a lot of work and a lot of time to perfect the book that you have now currently. How did you go about distributing the book? Did you put it out through online places, online bookstores, or give it away, or mail it to clients? How did that go?
Well, forgive my constantly clearing my throat. Create Space, which has now been, the best term I have, I guess, is absorbed by Amazon. It still exists, but it's under other names. Create Space was the publishing entity to whom I went, and Create Space made it available for distribution to bookstores, online sites, numerous places. I found my book available all over the world. If I just go online and type the title and find out where it is today. And it cost me nothing, zero, not a penny. Now, in spite of the fact that it had very, very broad distribution for free, that's not enough to make a big seller. Self-publishing was new back then, relatively, and bookstores just would not carry self-publishing. In fact, I wouldn't even call it self-publishing as much as I'd call it. It just was on-demand publishing. Nowadays, there are bookstores where you can walk in and say, you can say, I want this, here's the book I want Pirate's Guide, and they'll walk over to a machine, print the book out, bind it, and have it to you in an hour or so. It's just absurd how quickly this can be done, and it's right there on site. But back then, that was considered to be beneath contempt. I couldn't even get the local newspaper to do a review of it because it wasn't a real properly published book. That's not true anymore, but it was back then. So I have good distribution, and people can buy it easily. But that doesn't mean I'm selling a lot of them, because remember, I didn't really write it to sell it. I wrote it to fill a need. And one of the ways it could fill that need is if I'd meet people or I'd speak to a group of people who needed that information, I could teach them, I could show them what I could teach them, and then I could give them copies of my book, like business cards, because it's very inexpensive and very, very targeted. You can give out your business cards all over the place like you're sowing wheat. But if you have a targeted audience of people who came because they want that information, and you
right.
give them a business card that costs $3 or $4, which is what a book would cost, you've done well. They're gonna keep the book. They're gonna remember it. They're gonna pass the word around. It's way better advertising. So I'd often get many clients like that too. Now, many guys would actually sell books. They'd go do a speaking engagement. Maybe they'd speak for free. Maybe they'd speak for a fee, and then they'd sell the books. I never did that. It was not. This wasn't part of my business plan or approach. I was a patent attorney, not a book merchant.
So what role did distribution, like through Amazon, through KDP, through the online spaces, play in your overall distribution plan? Did it play an important role?
It was important that it be out there so that people could go online and see it. Okay, there it is. It's in Winters' resume. It's in my resume. There it is, available. This is true. I can buy a copy, and I would, except that Dave Winters already gave me a copy. But that's cool. Look at it. It's right there. It really is a book available online. That's a great deal of credibility. Just the fact that you can get it at Barnes and Noble, you can get it at Amazon, you can find reviews of it. It adds a great deal of professional credibility, and that is important of itself. And that's a little bit.
Right.
That's not something you'd normally think of when you're asking, why am I getting the book distributed? But I always have a dozen copies anyway available in my office to give to people on a moment's notice who may find the information necessary. And even if they don't need to come to me for service, they can come to me to find out, to have a recommendation. Who should they go to? What do they need to talk to them about? And I continue to help people like that, and I don't expect to stop. Plus, it gives me other opportunities. By having the book available online, people can take a look at it and a sample of it. And I was just invited last week because of my writing ability that was clearly displayed there, plus my technical comprehension, which was clearly displayed there, to assist out at Spaceport America with the upcoming world's first commercial launches of astronauts, for paying astronauts, space tourism. That the book and my writing ability and my knowledge and my ability to lay it out clearly and frankly in a way that's pleasant to read got me that invitation, and I jumped on it.
So I think it's safe to say that having a book, being an author of a book, has opened many doors to you that may have never otherwise opened. The publicity you got through this, just the notoriety of being an author, opened these doors for you.
Absolutely. My writing mentor, my first one, was when I was at Annapolis, and a gentleman named Edwards Park, not Edward Parks, Edwards Park, Ted, wrote for Smithsonian Magazine. He was an editor at large, and I'd read what he wrote in the magazines, and he'd sit and tell tales of World War II, where he was a fighter pilot, and his tales eventually became a book entitled Nanette. Nanette was the name of his fighter plane. Very funny, very heartwarming and heartrending in some ways. But when my first book came out, Ted told me, he said, you've entered a world that's quite elite from all the people around you. You are a published author. You've had something to say worth saying, and it was worthy enough that somebody else wanted to put it in print. And of course, like I said, that was in the days when publishing was a whole lot bigger deal. It was almost impossible to do unless you had an agent and a publisher ahead of time. But it still sets you apart. You've had what it takes. You've had the knowledge, the ability to communicate that knowledge, and I'm going to use a simple term, stick-to-itiveness, sufficient to make it reality.
Well, following on that, I guess it would be safe to say then that the perception of you and your business by both clients or customers and industry colleagues changed significantly once they discovered you were a published author.
Yes, when it was known that I was a published author, but in this case, I'm pleased to say, much more when they actually read what I had written.
Well, that's every author's dream.
I had one fellow. Yes, I had one gentleman who's made his entire fortune with his intellectual property. And matter of fact, I think you'll find this review online. He said he had no idea of what he didn't know and what he needed to do, and how to make his business so much better. And he never expected it from a book on intellectual property. Things like that, they give you a lot of credibility, but they also give you a lot of, they reinforce the fact that what you're doing is worth doing.
Have there been any other surprising results that have occurred for you since publishing your book or becoming an author?
Well, probably the one being invited to go out with Spaceport America is the greatest one. Let me think about that a second. There's a... Yeah, he says, yeah, yes. I didn't realize how much other attorneys needed. I think I mentioned earlier about attorneys dealing with my very specialized field. But,
right.
I published the book, and I put appendices in the back that are very handy. If you're an attorney and somebody comes in and says, well, I've got this thing that I have created, this kind of a sculpture thing, except it'll do this, and what is it? And can it be protected as intellectual property, and how? And this little index at the back, appendices, an attorney can flip to that, and you can go down the side of it real quick. I call it my weapons matrix for
you call it your
combat and pirates. Weapons matrix.
Oh,
this is a Navy reference. If I'm on a ship and I'm sailing in harm's way, and I know the bad guys are, they're back in the days of the Soviet Union, and okay, I hear these radars, so he's got this kind of a ship coming at me, and I know he's got this kind of weapons, and what am I going to do about those? Well, I have these kinds of weapons, and I can apply them in the following ways, and they'll all overlap, and it's very, very complex, but you essentially create a matrix in your mind, and you say, if he's coming at me with a gun, if he's coming at me with a missile, I'm going to meet it with a missile. If he comes at me with a gun, I'm going to meet it with an electronic radar interference. All these things. Well, same thing with intellectual property. I've got trademarks. I got patents. I got trade secrets. I've got copyright, and they all overlap. And that's one side of the matrix. The other side tells me there's sculpture, there's written work, there's music, there's recordings, and how does each one interact with the others? I call that my weapons matrix. Well, an attorney could grab that. He could flip through it real quick and say, okay, you got a sculpture there. Well, that could be covered by design, patent, and by copyright. And I know just the man you need to talk to. Here's the phone number for David Winters. He looks very informed, very learned, because he had that reference right there, and it took him right to the information he needed, and then he was able to intelligently suggest or refer his client to somebody who could handle the job for him. If he's happy, he looks good. He's happy. He actually knew what to do. He was able to refer his client intelligently and usefully. The client's happy. So lawyers like that. Lawyers liked it a lot. And then they got to reading my book, and they liked it even more because it really did tell the stories of how things really worked in kind of a tongue-in-cheek way sometimes, and didn't have all the dry legalese on top of it. So that was definitely a surprise.
Well, Dave, now that you've gone into retirement in terms of being an attorney, your humor might get you a professorial appointment at some law school to present law in a way that doesn't put the students to sleep, something that will motivate them to actually easily remember what they need to remember to pass the bar, and as well as, to practice to be an attorney.
Yeah, that's possible. Although I actually have unexpectedly mentored students. I had a lady of brilliant intellect who was attending law school, already had a PhD in immunology, and she decided if she was doing law school, maybe she'd like to use her technical expertise to become a patent attorney. And she got a copy of my book and got all excited and enthused. And then she found out that I was just down the road from her. She was in Nashville. And she called me, and I ended up mentoring her. She worked her way through taking the patent bar exam. Excuse me. But the way the book was put together gave her a much better big picture of intellectual property than the stovepiped, compartmentalized law school education did. And this has happened more than once now, although this lady is like my star to me. She happily tells people that I mentored her, and now she's an illustrious immunology patent attorney back on the East Coast. So I am using it to teach people, and when I get invited to speak for students, I always will bring copies of the book to give them. Excuse me. But my viewpoint is not necessarily always popular with the professors, because there's a certain amount of propriety or institutional correctness that I simply to which I simply do not adhere. So the students love it, but I think maybe that doesn't make me necessarily terribly popular with all the professors.
Right. Oh, I can see that very
I wasn't popular with them as a law student either. See, remember, I was a law student I graduated just before age 50. So that's not the usual law student.
Right.
So I wasn't easily cowed or intimidated or influenced by when I saw nonsense, I generally called on it. And when I read the legal cases and realized what was actually going on, the professors didn't necessarily have it figured out. And that's not a popular thing to do with your profs either. But now, given all that, I should say that one of the reasons this book all my books came about is that I have an unusual intellectual configuration that lets me see really big pictures and integrate all of my various careers and what I've learned in ways that it's very rare. There's the intellectual configuration that I have is generally credited to less than 2% of the population. So I do have something special to offer. But it's not something that even the professors always perceive right off the bat. And that's why sitting down and writing a book allows me to lay these things out clearly so they don't just get a little taste of it and not understand what's going on. I know that probably sounds terribly presumptuous, but it's just one of the blunt facts of how I ended up coming out of the factory.
Well, Dave, you've definitely had an interesting journey in terms of how the book came together and in writing the book itself, and the acclaim and recognition you've gotten after becoming a published author. How can our listeners reach you and purchase your book?
The way to get the book is simply to go to Amazon or Barnes & Noble. Now, the title is long. And if you type pirates, you're not going to find it. If you type Pirate's Guide, you're going to find all kinds of things that are not the book. So you can type my name, David Winters, but the easiest way is to search for The Pirate's Guide to Patents, Trademarks, and Copyrights, and that's what it'll come up on Amazon. You can find used copies for significantly less. Barnes & Noble carries it. I doubt that you'll find it in brick and mortar bookstores, or at least not very often. And in the book, I believe you'll probably find a phone number where I can be contacted for people who want to. And I happily still will give people some guiding hand to help them succeed in their aspirations. So I'm happy to hear from them. I'm going to say my email address, which is also very tedious because it simply tells who I am. It is Winters Patent Law. Winters Patent Law at bellsouth.net. Winters Patent Law at bellsouth.net. That gets me a lot of phone calls from people who misread it and think that I deal with patients and want me to work on medical malpractice. But other than that, it's pretty self-explanatory.
Well, we'll put that in the show notes as well. Well, Dave, I want to thank you today for being our guest on Business Innovators Radio. I appreciate all of you listening to today's episode. Take care. We'll see you soon on our next episode.
Thanks for listening to Business Innovators Radio. To hear all episodes featuring leading industry influencers and trendsetters, visit us online at businessinnovatorsradio.com today.